What if the rights to your body weren't really yours? In 1927, a Supreme Court came to the decision to forcibly sterilize Carrie Buck, a 17-year-old from Virginia. In the Supreme Court, both sides are supposed to come to a compromise when faced with a conflict. But was this a fair compromise? How did such a case come to be? Did the court's decision help or harm the public interest? About 20 years before Buck v. Bell took place, there was a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts. It regarded whether or not you could force someone to be vaccinated against smallpox. This raised the question of whether the government should have control over a person's body. In 1907, one of the first sterilization laws was authorized in Indiana. It gave permission to forcibly sterilize inmates throughout the state. Where did this issue begin? Charles Darwin was a scientist who came up with the idea of natural selection, a theory that the strongest species will survive over the weakest species. In nature, the weaker of any given species dies out over time. Darwin looked at this phenomenon in brown and green beetles. He found that the brown beetles lived longer than the green beetles because their color served as camouflage. The success of certain beetle species over others morphed, for some people, into an idea that some races among humans were dominant over other races. The theory of eliminating lesser races or genetically inferior people from reproduction to better society is the core idea of eugenics. Eugenics was supported by many scientists such as Dr. John Bell. He thought it was a useful way to sterilize people who were unfit by his own judgment to procreate. Whether or not you were determined to be unfit was based on traits such as your IQ, your morality, your marital status, your education, and your ethnicity.
The belief is that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nordic people are the most evolved, best, most intelligent people, and that all of the other races and ethnicities exist on a hierarchy below Nordics. Black people are always on the bottom of that hierarchy.
Carrie Buck was born in 1906 to Emma Buck. Shortly after her birth, Emma was diagnosed as feeble-minded, which is a term that is not used in today's psychology. This diagnosis was less about her mental health and more about the doctor's opinion of her sexual behavior. Carrie was sent to a foster home at a young age. She gave birth to her daughter Vivian at 17 in 1924. She claimed to have been raped by her foster family's nephew and had the baby because of him. The superintendent of the Virginia Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded, John H. Bell, decided to use Buck as a test case for the state's new sterilization law. One of the most prominent justices of the case was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. was born in 1841 in Boston, Massachusetts. He fought on the Union side of the Civil War for 3 years before attending Harvard Law School in 1864. He was appointed to the Massachusetts State Court in 1883. In 1899, he became that court's Chief Justice. The court of Buck v. Bell contained some of the most important people and strongest legal minds of the time. The justices were Willis Van Devanter, James C. McReynolds, Louis Brandeis, George Sutherland, Pierce Butler, Edward T. Sanford, Harlan F. Stone, and Oliver Wendell Holmes. William H. Taft, former U.S. President, was the Chief Justice. Holmes wrote the Statement of the Majority, which is known for being very harsh.
He was wounded at least once in the Civil War, lost quite a few men, and I think his thoughts were shaped by that war experience in a lot of what he did and what he wrote. And especially in this case, if these people, these good citizens, could give up their life, then, in his opinion, those lesser citizens should also have to sacrifice for the greater good.
3 generations of imbeciles are enough, he says in his statement. Pierce Butler dissented, which means he did not agree to sterilize Buck. However, he did not write an opinion like Holmes did.
In the Buck v. Bell Supreme Court case, a lot of evidence was used to support the fact that Buck was feeble-minded. However, the evidence used then would not be used today. Buck was deemed an imbecile because scientists and legal minds believed she was sexually active. She claimed that she was not sexually active, but that she was raped by her foster family's nephew.
In the Buck v. Bell case transcript, it is stated that Carrie's mental age was 9 years. Since the admission to the colony mental test and observation have confirmed the findings of the commission, she having a mental age of 9 years and feeble-minded of the moron class. Page 9. Buck did fine in school, so it does not make sense that her mental age would be 9. If a scientist today had a theory she was trying to prove, she would not be taken seriously if she gave the evidence as vague as the evidence used to support the fact that Buck was feeble-minded and that her mental age was 9. Eugenicists, such as Dr. John Bell, did not want feeble-minded people to reproduce because they believed feeble-mindedness was heritable. In the Buck v. Bell case transcript, there is a statement that implies feeble-mindedness is hereditary, and the court, having further found facts upon the evidence adduced that the said Carrie Buck is feeble-minded, and by the laws of heredity is the probable potential parent of socially inadequate offspring, page 4. It is no longer believed that feeble-mindedness is hereditary.
The case document also states that she may be sexually sterilized without detriment to her general health, and that her welfare and that of society will be promoted by her sterilization, page 4. This is a very strong statement. You must really believe someone is unfit to have children to believe society will benefit from her sterilization.
I do think that women are prejudiced frequently when they're on trial, but particularly if they don't meet stereotypes of being a good mother, being a good wife, being deferential to men. I also think we have stereotypes of rape victims. And even though it's been, a long time that we've tried to change this, for at least since the 1970s, still people blame victims of rape. What were you wearing? Why were you with that person? Why did you drink? I think that stereotypes and assumption with Buck v. Bell, it was used as kind of the basis for saying she shouldn't be allowed to have children.
The sterilization of Carrie Buck was intended to benefit society, but what it really did was compromise Carrie's rights to her own body and put the government in a position that some people see as at odds with one of our most valuable personal freedoms, the right to have children. The Buck decision was supposed to help the future development of the country, but it took away fundamental rights from men and women who were sterilized. The Buck versus Bell case affected people all over the world. Once Buck was passed to be sterilized, it became a law of the land. This means that people all over Virginia could be sterilized under the law. Eugenics became normal throughout the country until Hitler came to power in the early 1930s. Slowly, eugenics in the United States became less prominent.
The fact is that those ideas really started here in the United States. Those ideas had been developed and implemented for decades in the United States, and during the rise of the Third Reich in Germany, they actually modeled their sterilization laws on the ones in the United States. They brought over prominent eugenicists and scientists to Germany and gave them prizes and medals and elevated them. The United States had a huge role to play in what happened in Germany.
There is a connection between eugenics and the Holocaust because the same ideas were used. Specific traits of dislike were to be eliminated from the gene pool by death instead of sterilization.
Nazis took the ideas of eugenics and eugenic ideology and, ultimately took them to a more extreme conclusion by actually gassing and murdering Jewish people, disabled people, gay people, etc. And that is the fact that the United States preceded the Nazis in this way of thinking is something that most Americans are unaware of.
Though it is a controversial subject, Professor Winfield believes that Hitler and the Nazis in Germany took inspiration from the United States eugenics. The sterilization law in Virginia was not repealed until 1974, but the Buck versus Bell case itself still has never been overturned to this day. Though we can trace many bad events to eugenics, there are some good outcomes from this science. Birth control was popularized and created by eugenicists like Margaret Sanger, who opened the first birth control clinic. This was an alternative to sterilization to prevent pregnancy. Though Sanger was a eugenicist, she believed that a woman should have control over her body, hence the creation of birth control. Genetics as a science has also evolved through eugenics. Scientists learn through the laws of heredity and the mistakes of past scientists through eugenics to further improve on genetic science. The sterilization of Carrie Buck and the Buck versus Bell Supreme Court case is an example of a conflict met with an undesirable compromise. The laws of the 1920s were much different from what they are today. The question of whether the government has a right to intrude on a person's body is still a question today.
Now we have a much greater recognition of the right to privacy than we did, the court did at the time that this case was decided.
This question today stemmed from the decision of the court. The eugenics movement created a conflict all around the world that was not solved with a compromise. It further created harm and conflict to international citizens. The forced sterilization of an innocent girl changed many persons' views of our laws and constitutional rights today.